All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. I appreciate everyone that we have here today taking some time to come together and talk to us about succession planning. We're about to get started with the webinar. So for anyone who has not been to one of our webinars before, I want to let you know that the session is being recorded. That means that you will have the recording available to you after the session. So within a few days of the webinar, it will be sent out to you. So for anyone who is not comfortable with a recorded session, I want to let you know that that is will be ongoing throughout it. And for anyone who is looking forward to maybe having access to this content again afterwards, it will be sent to you after the webinar. I want to thank everyone for being here. My name is Brittany Anderson. I'm a senior consultant at Sigma Assessment Systems. You may have seen me at some of these webinars before. Sigma is a professional services company, and we have specialty in a lot of things that are associated with leadership and strong leadership in organizations. Things like leadership assessments, personality assessments, or selection assessments. We also have a lot of solutions around succession planning, talent development, leadership, and high potential development in general. And so because of that, we have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge that we'd like to share. We host webinars on a somewhat regular basis, so at least once a month we will have a webinar. And so if you're interested in topics like succession planning and talent development, you can check out some of our webinars, and maybe you've been here with us once or twice before. Today, as you can see, we're here to talk about succession planning. So I just want to give you an overview of what we're going to do with our time together. We have about 60 minutes together, and most of that time will be spent with our presenter giving you some information on succession planning, going over what it is and why it's important, and also providing you with some tips and tricks around how you can facilitate that process for your organization. But in addition to presenting content to you, we will also have an opportunity for a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions while we're going through this content, or if you have anything that you're coming into this session with a question about, please feel free to drop it into the Q&A box at the bottom panel of your screen. I'll be monitoring that throughout the session, so if you have a quick question, I can answer it for you, but we'll have time for the group to hear answers to the Q&A as well. If there are questions that we don't get an opportunity to get to, especially, we have a nice size group here today. So if there's some questions that we don't have time for, we will follow up with that after the session. So no worries about that. We'll get around to answering your question for sure. As I mentioned, we are recording this webinar and you will have access to the recording, but I also want to let you know that we'll also be sharing the slides afterwards. So you don't have to worry about rushing to take down notes on everything that's on the screen. We'll be sharing those slides with you afterwards, and you'll have an opportunity to keep that content for yourself. So that's all the housekeeping that I have to do today about our webinar format. The last thing that I'd like to do is just introduce you to your presenter. So Leonid is one of our consultants at Sigma Assessment Systems. He's been working with the consulting team for a while now. In addition to working with us, he is also pursuing his PhD in industrial organizational psychology at Western University. His research there is primarily focused on investigating factors that contribute to optimal work motivation, as well as things like well-being and performance. He's got an interest in psychometric properties of assessments and of personality in general. And at Sigma, Leo applies his skills to supporting things like succession planning, talent development, and leadership development. So I'm very happy to have him here presenting the webinar for you today. And I'll say thank you so much, Leo, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Brittany. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day so far. Again, thanks for joining. Today, we'll talk about the importance of building a comprehensive succession plan, what the necessary steps are to do so, and how we at Sigma can support you in your succession planning efforts. So here's the kind of general roadmap for what we're going to talk about today. First, we'll go through the basics in air quotes, and by basics, I don't mean that it's somehow rudimentary or elementary, since many of you will be quite familiar with succession planning, but more so to lay the foundation to make sure that later on we're kind of talking about the same things from a definitional standpoint. We'll then go over Sigma's 6-step succession process, the associated stages with that process and what that might look like. And then finally, we'll discuss some common issues that our clients face, as well as the benefits of working with a consultant in your succession planning efforts. So first of all, what is succession planning, and what defines a good succession plan? So broadly speaking, succession planning is a strategic process that is implemented by organizations to identify, develop, and nurture individuals within the company who have potential to fill key leadership positions in the future. And so by definition, it's a proactive approach that ensures the continuity of leadership and management by preparing employees to take on higher roles when current incumbents, retire, resign, or otherwise leave their positions. So, like I said, a lot of people are aware of succession planning as kind of a process or as a construct in one way or another. But like I said, it's also important to go over the core features of what we're talking about here to make sure that we're talking about the same things and are on the same page. So the critical purpose of succession planning is building up internal talent before it is needed. And so let's go through some defining features of what makes a good succession plan. So first and foremost, having clear objectives. The succession plan should have well-defined goals and objectives that outline what the organization actually aims to achieve through the succession planning. And these succession goals should be in sync with the overall strategic objectives of your organization. That helps ensure a cohesive approach towards longer-term success. And these goals should be quantifiable and measurable, which allows the organization to track progress and actually evaluate the effectiveness of the succession plan that was put in place. Now, since succession planning is not a one-time event, as you'll see later, it's more of a continuous process involving, tweaking and improvements along the way. It's important to kind of keep in mind that it is a continuous process involving regular assessments of potential candidates, reviewing organizational needs on a regular basis, and things of that nature. Regular reviews and updates generally help ensure that the plan remains relevant while also being adaptable to changing circumstances, which allows for adjustments based on things like evolving business requirements. And succession plan should take a long-term view, identifying and nurturing talent that can fill key roles in the present and also in the future. So with that said, the plan should be also adaptable to unexpected events. And these can include sudden leadership vacancies, maybe market conditions change, and we've seen that especially in the past couple of years, or shifts in organizational priorities as well. So anticipating different scenarios and having contingency plans in place allows the organization to respond effectively to things that are unforeseen. And also a flexible plan that's adaptable considers a diverse set of skills and competencies, which ensures that successors are equipped to handle a wide range of challenges that might arise in the future. So those are kind of some core, some key features that might define what a good succession plan looks like. All right, so now that we know what it might look like, what will that actually help you accomplish, broadly speaking? So a good question to keep in mind is if a vacancy were to arise, could you do something about it? What would you do about it? And a good succession plan accomplishes a few key objectives. So first and foremost, it ensures a seamless transition of leadership, which minimizes disruptions to the organization's operations and general productivity. It can help boost employee morale and engagement by offering very clear career paths and actually demonstrating to employees that the organization is committed to their development. It also helps provide stability and instills confidence among employees, various stakeholders, and investors by demonstrating that the organization is prepared for leadership changes or for unforeseen circumstances. And so ultimately, a high quality succession plan should give you confidence that your company can effectively fill vacant roles. So now at this point, now that we've gone over some essential features here, we'd like to hear from you. Does your company have a succession plan? And keep in mind that succession planning can look different from organization to organization. All right. this is encouraging to see. It looks like a lot of people have a well-documented succession planning process. Some people might have a kind of less formalized process in place, or maybe have a few replacements in mind. So we have a good distribution here. For those who already have a document succession planning process, perhaps you might take a look at kind of how we conceptualize and then for those who maybe don't, there's lots of things that we're going to present today that can be helpful for you. Okay, see if we can close that. Awesome. Okay. So sometimes when we ask people if they are engaging in succession planning, it turns out that they're actually engaging in what is more so replacement hiring. So I think it's important to compare these. They're related but very different processes. So again, they might on their face look kind of similar, but there are very important differences to go through. So for example, if Brittany were to leave today unexpectedly, the situation would look very different depending on whether our organization has a succession plan in place or if we would have to rely on replacement hiring. So if we had to rely on replacement hiring, we would likely be scrambling to find the best available external candidate as soon as possible. Whereas if we have a succession plan in place, we might promote a previously identified successor into her role and someone who's already been engaged in necessary professional development activities and things of that sort. So let's compare a few features of succession planning and replacement hiring in a little bit more detail. So as I alluded to earlier, succession planning is a long-term and strategic approach to talent management, whereas replacement hiring is often reactive. Something happens, we need to react to it, as opposed to being proactive. And most often, it's a kind of a short-term solution to fill an immediate vacancy. Succession planning focuses on identifying and developing internal talent to fill positions in the future. And generally speaking, replacement hiring involves hiring people from outside the organization to fill specific positions, with a focus on primarily matching skills and qualifications that are specified for the vacant position. Succession planning is an ongoing process, so it's continually identifying and nurturing potential leaders within the organization, while replacement hiring is, like I said, usually initiated when a key employee leaves suddenly, and so there isn't as much of an emphasis on that development. And so succession planning might emphasize training, mentorship, and various skill development to prepare employees for higher roles. And then with replacement hiring, there isn't really a lot of room to engage in those sorts of activities. On a somewhat related note, succession planning considers not only skills, but also the cultural fit within the organization. And with replacement hiring, new hires might need some time to adapt to the organization's culture, which, it takes time and can cause some initial disruptions. So it's not quite as smooth of a process. And so on that note, succession planning generally aims for a smooth transition of leadership, which ensures continuity in the organization's goals and vision. And with replacement hiring, this is quite difficult to achieve. So kind of distilling it down a bit, in essence, succession planning is a proactive long-term strategy that focuses on internal talent development and ensuring that there is a good pipeline of future leaders, while replacement hiring is a reactive approach to quickly fill immediate vacancies from external sources. Now, with that said, sometimes replacement hiring is totally fine, especially for roles that are kind of maybe lower in the organization and where unforeseen things happen. So that's not to say that it should never be used, but there are just some important differences to highlight. So succession planning it's not about the best person that we can get right now out of a pool of candidates. It's about finding the absolute best person for a role. And that obviously takes time and effort. So succession planning is more work up front, but when a role opens up, and it will, the process of filling it is much more natural. So now we'd like to hear from you again. So now that you know the difference between these two, how would you classify what your team does as succession planning, replacement hiring, or maybe kind of a mix of both? Again, both have their place. So All right. Oh, the poll went all the way up there on another screen. Okay, a mix. So that's pretty typical. And again, most organizations will engage in some variety of both. And like I said earlier, replacement hiring might often be the better choice for lower positions within the organization, or maybe where turnover is a little bit higher. So that makes a lot of sense. This kind of helps contextualize things going forward. All right, moving on now. So at this point, we've talked about quite a few things, and even though you and I might think that succession planning is important, or one could even say critical, others might not quite be convinced yet. So I think we should go over some ideas that might help explain the value of succession planning to various stakeholders, and consequently within your organization, generating buy-in for these kinds of processes. Because people are going to leave. It's not about whether this will happen. It will happen, and so you might as well be prepared for it. So this is kind of similar to what I said earlier, but succession planning helps ensure continuity and seamless transitions when key employees leave or retire, and that avoids particularly unpleasant disruptions in leadership. Which helps maintain stability within the organization. Now, something that's not talked about as much, but it is quite important, is that succession planning encourages a culture of continuous learning and development within an organization. So it provides employees with growth opportunities, which helps increase their job satisfaction and loyalty and commitment to the organization. And it fosters an environment where employees are encouraged to innovate and creatively, knowing that they actually have potential pathways to higher positions where they can implement those ideas. From a financial standpoint, succession planning can greatly reduce the need for extensive external recruitment processes, which are costly and very time-consuming in and of themselves. So internal candidates are often more cost-effective to train and then subsequently integrate into higher roles. From a knowledge transfer standpoint, succession planning actually facilitates the transfer of knowledge from experienced employees to potential successors through various processes such as mentorship. And it helps preserve that ongoing institutional knowledge, which helps ensure that critical expertise is retained within the organization, as opposed to going elsewhere or just kind of being lost. Now, similar to the developmental points earlier, succession planning can help improve employee morale. Because you are demonstrating to your employees that your organization values their growth, their contributions, and their potential. And it's really encouraging for employees to be able to see a long-term path for themselves within an organization that provides a lot of stability. And so this can help cultivate a culture of loyalty and commitment among employees who see as the organization as actually heavily investing in their future. And so this makes things like teamwork and collaboration more likely because employees understand their roles in the larger context of the organization's future. So it's not just about what am I doing today? It's okay, this is what I'm doing today. And maybe in a couple of years, I'm going to move into this management position. And it kind of helps you understand where you sit within the organization broadly. Now, in terms of stakeholder confidence, that includes investors, customers. They might have more confidence in the organization's ability to maintain stability and also kind of make sure that the ship is still going in a strategic direction. This helps demonstrate proactive management and can enhance the organization's reputation and credibility within the industry. And then finally, overall, succession planning ensures that the organization has leaders who understand and are aligned with long-term vision and objectives. And it provides a very structured approach to talent management that while it is structured, it's still adaptable to unforeseen circumstances. So the bottom line is unforeseen things happen, and it's very important to be prepared. And like I said earlier, it isn't a matter of if people will leave, it is a matter of when. So it's best to deal with things now and kind of front load that work as opposed to kicking the proverbial can down the road. Okay. So what does Sigma's evidence-based succession process actually look like? So on the left side of this slide, you'll see the core components of each step, which we're about to go through individually. And then on the right side, you will see the associated Sigma tool or template that is relevant to each step. So while ways to implement these things might change from organization to organization, the process is the same with room for customization. And Brittany's going to post the link in the chat where you can have access to these various templates. Okay, so now we can dive into each of these stages individually. So generally speaking, we begin by identifying critical roles within the organization. These are the roles that should actually be targeted as part of your succession efforts. And most people start with their leadership team, and that's kind of natural, and that's okay. We're not finding all roles that are important to the organization because, well, presumably most, if not all, roles should be important, right? Rather, we're looking at which specific roles should be targeted in the succession plan itself. And so there are various criteria that are used to determine what critical roles might be. We have whole resources just on that topic, but let's go through a few. So first of all, determining impact on operations. So roles that have a significant impact on day-to-day operations and overall performance of the company. So these positions, if left vacant, would greatly disrupt workflow and severely hinder productivity. Maybe positions with specialized skills and knowledge, expertise, unique knowledge that might be unique to your particular industry. So maybe considering roles that have a demand for technical proficiencies, specific certifications or education, things that are essential for effective job performance in that particular specialized role. And like I said earlier, leadership and decision-making roles. Those might be part of your critical role identification process. So individuals that really influence the direction of the organization, manage teams, make critical decisions on a day-to-day basis that actually impact the entire company. You might also consider roles that manage key client relationships, things that are actually built up over time, or have significant interactions with stakeholders, suppliers, partners, etc. So these are the kinds of positions that involve maintaining and nurturing crucial business connections. And so one might consider them vital for succession planning. Okay. You might also look at people who are cross-functional in terms of their role. So roles that have cross-functional impact that collaborate with multiple departments or teams, because so in that case, if somebody leaves, it doesn't just affect that team. That effect kind of spreads out throughout the organization. So considering positions that require collaboration, coordination with stakeholders across various business areas, that might be another criteria. Now we're talking mostly in the present tense, but it's also important to consider future skill needs. So anticipating, okay, based on your organization and what industry you find yourself in, things like industry trends, technological advancements, you might have to identify roles that require emerging skills, ensuring that the organization is prepared and competitive in the future. Slightly less interesting, but nonetheless important, are regulatory and compliance requirements. So including roles that are critical for ensuring regulatory compliance and adherence to industry standards. So things like legal and compliance matters, basically. You might include roles that are revolve around those responsibilities as part of your succession plan. And as a final example, customer-facing positions, people who directly interact with customers on a day-to-day basis, or the end users of your products or your services, because these people can significantly influence satisfaction and loyalty among your customers. And so they are critical for maintaining that positive client-organization relationship. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the criteria that you might rely on for determining and targeting roles that you want to include as part of your succession program. Okay, so next step after identifying critical roles, we build what are called success profiles for them. These describe the competency, skills, and experience needed to effectively perform each role. So this might sound a little bit like a job description, but it includes a job description to an extent, but it also includes the character and leadership qualities needed for success in the role. But again, job description, success profile, two very different things. So an excellent job description is important for building a comprehensive success profile, but it cannot replace a success profile. So in our case, the Sigma Success Profile is a template or worksheet designed to describe the leadership talent needed for success in a critical role as part of our succession planning process. The goal of this worksheet is to outline the knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies needed for the role, both now and also in the future. And so this provides you with a clear, comprehensive list of the requirements of the role and can act as a comparison against which to evaluate succession candidates. And that helps ensure a fairer, but also more simplified selection process. And this worksheet is best used following the identification of these high impact or critical roles within the organization. Among those very succession specific benefits, it can help you align job requirements with true indicators of success in a role. Obviously, it's good for selection and hiring purposes. Also, establishing role clarity, because some organizations do struggle with having a very comprehensive and robust job description and an understanding of what exactly is required for successfully performing various roles. Also relevant to onboarding programs, employee development, and things of that nature. So that's kind of that's the second step in the 6-step succession process. So these profiles are not so much about the person in the role. We're not interested as much in the qualities that a particular individual or incumbent has at present. And this is one of the challenges. It's about thinking, what does the role need, not what the incumbent currently has. And it can be easy and it's almost automatic for people to kind of mentally default to incumbent qualities. I mean, as humans, we find these things very salient. So that it can be a challenge to do that. And we can definitely help you out with that component of the succession planning process. So after we've built success profiles for your critical roles, we nominate successors for these roles, where we consider potential candidates for each role identified in the plan so far. So the succession bench identifies information from potential successors, such as their name, their readiness level, and general timelines for succession readiness. And this is about building up a pipeline for the role without, so to speak, putting all eggs in one basket. So it's important in this stage to cast the net quite widely and think broadly and nominate people at different levels. So just as a brief example, we can go over what a leadership progression might look like for someone who is in a sales position. So first off, somebody might start off as an entry-level sales representative, so responsible for learning about products and services and understanding the sales process, focusing on achieving individual sales targets and building a strong customer base. Then a person might move on to a senior representative. So after they've demonstrated consistent performance and customer relationship skills, they might mentor an entry-level representatives and assist in their training and development. And in this case, the person starts to gain exposure to more complex situations and larger clients. Then a person from there might progress to become a sales team leader. So actually leading a small team of sales reps, responsible for team targets, performance evaluations, coaching, and at this point, further developing leadership skills, learning to balance individual and team goals. And then that person might move into management positions, so involved more in the strategic planning of sales and decision making, managing day-to-day sales operations, and resolving customer issues, and actually then becoming involved in the recruitment, training, and performance management of other sales team members. And eventually, such a person might actually be a good candidate for overseeing the entire sales department. So you can see here how a person might incrementally build the required leadership skills to eventually find themselves in a rather senior position within the organization. Again, this is a pretty linear progression, and in this case, we didn't exactly identify individuals from different departments, but you may wish to nominate people at different levels and perhaps consider various lateral moves as part of the succession process. And the leadership pipeline generally outlines a clear progression from entry level to potentially even executive roles within various departments. So after that, we assess candidate development needs. So it's important at this stage that you find the right assessment. And in the context of our offerings, this is the Leadership Skills Profile Revised Assessment, or the LSPR. So we provide scientifically validated assessments to determine what the strengths and development opportunities for candidates might be in your succession process. And again, you can only do this if you have a robust, scientifically validated assessment. So our LSPR is a unique personality-based instrument that uses information about an individual's personality to predict their strength and development opportunities. And so the LSPR predicts performance on 50 competencies that are critical to leadership effectiveness. And if combined with the benchmarking option, the assessment allows you to identify in advance the leadership competencies that are most critical for effectiveness in your organization, and then generate a report that includes information kind of selectively on those competencies. However, besides the use of an assessment, while critical, candidates are also compared to require technical skills, experience, and other things that we've already discussed in order to perform the incumbent's role effectively. And so all of this is being kind of layered on the previous steps in our succession planning process here. So now that we have our successors nominated, we've assessed their development needs, we can proceed to the developing talent stage. And at a high level, this stage is largely focused on prioritizing and enacting development plans for your successors. And this is where a lot of time is generally spent with clients. But again, you won't really see results if you rush this very critical stage. It takes a lot of patience. But again, by definition, succession planning is a long-term process. And so this is where a lot of the time is spent. So let's look at some examples of possible ways organizations can support employee development in a succession context. So, for example, creating individualized plans that address specific skill gaps, preparing individuals for higher roles. And that's where those skill gaps is where an assessment can be particularly helpful, because it actually provides actionable feedback that a person can actually then digest. Things like structured training programs, so actually offering targeted training covering essential leadership skills like communication, strategic thinking, and other such competencies. Providing guidance through experienced mentors, which can help in skill enhancement, problem solving, and other relevant skills. Some organizations might rotate employees through quite diverse roles and projects, which expands employee skill set and kind of helps foster innovation. Also providing continuous feedback. So employees actually kind of know what they're doing well and what their development opportunities still are. That's absolutely important in the developing talent stage. You might also consider encouraging participation in professional networks for exposure to diverse ideas, industry knowledge, and various other experiences. And finally, although again, not a comprehensive list, but it's important to recognize various achievements. So when you see someone's doing something well, or there's something someone was really struggling with and is actually now has clearly done a lot of work and is doing much better, it's important to actually recognize that. People value various incentives in different ways, but recognition can be a very effective way to boost employee motivation. So ultimately, this not only helps candidates develop professionally, so they see the personal value to it, but it again demonstrates to them that the organization actually cares about their professional growth, and they can see that there is a future for them within the organization. And this can help improve a variety of job attitudes, reduce turnover, and bolster organizational commitment as well. All right. So I don't want to imply now that we've gotten to the far right side of the screen that this is kind of where the process stops. But the next step in the succession process is measuring progress. So again, this is not an A to B process. This succession planning involves some cyclical components. For example, based on your progress measurement, you might have to go back and maybe adjust your developmental plans for your employees. So again, there is a kind of a back and forth component here, and it's an ongoing process. So how do we know if we're actually meeting the goals that we initially outlined as part of our succession plan? We want to look back at our efforts and check in, see how we're doing. Are we actually achieving what we're hoping to achieve? And looking at okay, what metrics can we use that would actually reflect our original goals? So there are a lot of different metrics that we've used with clients in the past, but I'll give you some examples. One of them might be measuring the number of internal promotions to key positions from the succession pipeline, and also evaluating the time it takes to fill critical roles, right? So those are pretty concrete. Monitoring retention rates of high potential employees, the people you're really investing in and you don't want them to leave. Monitoring retention rates of those employees identified in the succession plan, helping, ensuring that their work engagement levels continue to be high and that they remain committed to the organization. Also, you might assess performance of successors in their new roles compared to predefined metrics and expectations. Gathering feedback is also a critical part of the process. So gathering feedback from those who are actually involved in your succession program to see, okay, are you satisfied kind of with the program as it stands? What can we do better? What do you think are the next opportunities for your own personal growth? And having those discussions on an ongoing basis. Also measuring progress and skills and competencies of potential successors through training programs and also through scientifically validated assessments. And then already alluded to this earlier, but comparing the costs of hiring externally and internally, or rather promoting internally, that highlights the ongoing cost effectiveness of your succession plan. And you might also look at things like KPIs. You might look at customer satisfaction and whatever other metrics are important to your organization to see whether any of those align with the goals that you set out with for your succession plan. So again, the end of this process is not the end of the succession plan. You might have to go back and forth, but this is the general kind of framework within which the succession plan is built and then subsequently adjusted if needed. All right. So now when we talk about, how to implement our plan well, there are quite a few challenges. And we see quite a few common challenges. Some examples are, focusing too much or exclusively on the executive level or leadership level, issues with documenting the process and updating the plan as you're going. Also keeping the succession plan kind of a hush-hush secret, not always the best idea. And also delegating all of the responsibilities associated with the succession plan to HR generally is also not the best idea. So succession planning is like any other strategic plan. It is difficult, and we know that companies struggle with this. In fact, 67% of well-formulated at the outset strategic plans fail due to poor execution, and 1 in 3 leaders rate their company as poor or very poor at implementing strategic plans. So that might not sound very encouraging, but the good news is there's lots of room for improvement, and we have a lot of tools that are available to you for improving your succession planning efforts. So like I said, while it may be relatively easy to draft a strategic plan, actually implementing it is generally the most difficult part. And this, of course, includes succession planning and any other strategic plan. All the work that you put into drafting a plan can effectively go to waste if your implementation is not properly considered. And that's where working with a coach or a consultant can really, really help, specifically with the implementation component. So at this point, we also wanted to hear from you again. How successful would you say your team is at implementing strategic planning? All right, sorry, I had to unmute myself there really quickly. All right, and this isn't really surprising. It's very uncommon for people to always follow through on strategic plans. This was something that's that difficult being constantly consistent and effective with it is very difficult. And so this is what we typically see with clients. There are some things that there's some specific strategic plans that you might struggle with more than others. Some plans are much easier to achieve than others. But thankfully, we have a lot of resources that can help you out with that. Now, we actually have another poll after this. With all these challenges and strategic planning in mind, what are some of the greatest challenges that your team faces? So time, buy-in, knowledge, standardization, having a dedicated team, or maybe long-term commitment to strategic initiatives. All right, we have quite a distribution here. It's perhaps not surprising to see the time component. Everyone is super, super busy. It's really difficult to carve out the time to engage in strategically relevant processes. And then, as all of you know, on a day-to-day basis, lots of things are pinging you left, right, and center, and it's kind of difficult to focus on some long-term things at the expense of things that are really pressing. We did talk about some components of buy-in earlier, so hopefully some things today will be helpful in kind of articulating the value to various stakeholders. Yeah, standardization of metrics, that's an ongoing issue for lots of organizations. But all of these things are things we kind of touched on today. And again, we do have a lot of resources that can help you out with all of these. Okay. So working with a consultant, getting back to kind of why that might be beneficial, can save you a good deal of time. Getting back to the time was the most popular option in that previous poll. And so working with a consultant can save you a good deal of time and also administrative costs. So consultants use time-tested strategies that have worked for other organizations and clients that are, facing very similar challenges. And consultants can also act as strategic partners that help you remain accountable to your own goals, while also remaining objective and assisting with unbiased decision making. And finally, consultants have expertise and a lot of experience. And this is the result of having a foundation of both scientific and also business knowledge, as well as working with many past clients who experience very similar challenges. So kind of in sum, engaging an HR consultant allows companies to save valuable time and resources by leveraging expertise to streamline HR processes, which results in significant cost savings and allows organizations to actually focus on their core business objectives, which is what they do best. So here I wanted to highlight some of the resources we have that are specific to succession planning. And so we also have free resources that you can use. The succession planning guide is a single PDF, kind of nice and concise, that you can download and read, and it provides you an overview of key information, lots of which we covered today. Now the training is also a free resource. It's an interactive online experience. So it's kind of like a virtual asynchronous course with modules. I believe there are about 5 modules posted on our website, and there's also an optional comprehension quiz at the end. So the training is a little bit more comprehensive, but if you want to just, kind of grab a resource and go, I would recommend you start with the succession planning guide. But if you're looking for, substantially more support, individualized support, and customized succession planning, then we have our succession planning launch. And this is our flagship support that helps organizations create a true customized plan that is tailored to your specific goals. So again, this is kind of more custom consulting and where you get someone to help guide you through the entire process. So we saw in the earlier poll that people struggle with a lot of components of strategic planning, and working with a consultant can really help with that. Again, this is specifically designed for customized personal support. And this is our proprietary service, and quite frankly, we do it better than anyone else. So if you are looking for that sort of individualized support, I would highly recommend that you contact us and we can chat with you. Um, all right, so there's an email address for contact purposes. And at this point, I believe we have some time to, yep, we're pretty much right on time. Some time to do a bit of Q&A if you guys have any questions. Happy to address those.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you for the presentation and the content so far. We do have a fair number of questions coming in, so we will get to as many of them as we can. And as I stated at the outset, if we don't get an opportunity to answer all the questions, we will follow up with people via email. So don't fear if you don't hear your question answered just now. We will get through as many of them as we have an opportunity to do so. So the first one that I have is actually more of a comment. I just want to restate something. Somebody shared some information with me about an earlier slide. So Leo, when you were talking about replacement hiring versus succession planning and the distinction between the two, we just had a reminder from one of our participants about just the astronomical cost that can come with replacing an individual, especially when you are unprepared. So we have talked a lot about, the fact that if you use replacement hiring, you may end up with someone who's sort of the best person available at the moment, although not necessarily the best person possible out there. But there's also this nice reminder here that, there are very real costs to not having a succession plan. And even if you're able to use replacement hiring to fill a role, there are still a lot of direct and indirect costs that come with that. So thank you to our participants who sent that reminder and sent a comment about that.
Yeah, definitely. Because especially when you need someone right now, it is easy to forget about all the components that go into actually hiring a person. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but if you even just Googling the average cost of hiring and onboarding an employee, it is quite staggering. Everything from paying people who are interviewing, to the actual training process. And when a person is coming externally, there's a lot of institutional knowledge and kind of culture components that are not already pre-existing. So the person isn't coming in with peak performance, really. There's lots of things that the person needs to learn. And so when you kind of extrapolate all that and think about the real cost, it definitely can add up pretty quickly.
Thank you. So the first question that I have for you, Leo, is should we tell candidates that they're candidates for a specific role? How transparent should we be with individuals?
I think you definitely don't, like I said earlier, you definitely don't want to, kind of keep everything a secret, like, hey, we're engaging in the succession plan, but you can't know anything about it. That's not very productive. So I wouldn't show an individual the succession bench, which shows where they are kind of relative to other potential candidates, but I think it's totally reasonable to inform individuals that they're being kind of considered for a role. And really, you won't know whether they're interested in that unless you know that you're considering them for that role. So I think that it is a kind of it's a balance to strike between letting people know that that they are being considered, but also not, bring in potential problems when where they see a relative ranking compared to other candidates.
Great, thank you. And you spoke about competencies as being really important and that building success profiles was really important. What skills or qualities do you think are essential for someone to become a successful leader, and how can organizations help them to develop these skills?
Right. As great of a question as that is, it's almost impossible to concisely answer. I mean, coming from an academic background, there's an entire study of leadership and what constitutes effective leadership. So, I mean, that's a whole kind of area of study in and of itself. But at Sigma, we do have a 50 competency leadership framework that has been empirically developed over the course of many years, which does highlight a lot of the things that, a lot of the competencies that are required for being successful in a leadership position. And when that's combined with the assessment component, which uses personality trait scores to predict performance on those competencies, you can get a lot of fine-grained feedback and information about what a person is likely good at and where the kind of zone of development for that individual might be. So unfortunately, I can't, provide a very comprehensive, I wish I could, what a good leader should be like, but that would take us like many hours.
I think it's important to recognize too that what a good leader looks like is so unique to each organization. It's based off of the cultural values of the company, the mission and the vision. And so exploring what good leadership looks like for your company is part of this process. So that leads us into another question about development. When should you be looking to develop a potential successor? And when you do, how many competencies are you supposed to focus on at one time?
Well, I guess there isn't a specific time when you need to start. The best time to start is in advance. So the best time to start is before you need that individual. There is no way that you can rush a development process because, the benefits of that you probably won't see a lot. So if you recall the 6-stage process, developing talent is where a lot of the time is spent. So if you know that you have an employee that you would like to develop, someone who has a lot of potential and you would like them to stay with the company long term, there is no, start as, I guess, like whenever. And development doesn't have to be formalized. Even really informal things like mentorship, and kind of ongoing discussions, all of that can be quite helpful. Now, there isn't necessarily an X number of competencies you should focus on. But when in the context of an assessment, you would be provided with a specific list of competencies that an individual might work on. And again, depending on the role, some are more important than others. And that's kind of where the succession planning process can also help with identifying, okay, you have this particular role that you're building a succession pipeline for. What are the competencies that I should focus on now? And also what might I need in the future? And so that's a process that we can help you with. So there isn't a very specific number, or because it does change from from role to role.
Perfect. Thank you. And do you have any tips for small organizations that don't have as much depth to their succession benches or may not have as many people in the organization?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have any tips that are necessarily all that different from a larger organization, but when you are working within a smaller company, there is more opportunity for the kinds of developmental interactions that we talked about earlier. So there are also benefits to having that kind of a more tightly knit group of employees. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, Brittany, but there isn't anything immediate that immediately comes to mind as being, radically different or something that would render the succession planning process as less effective just because the organization happens to be smaller.
Yeah, in general, we still follow the same process with small to medium-sized companies that maybe don't have the depth of benches of other organizations might. There is an option there to take advantage of the fact that small companies often have people who wear a lot of hats, who contain the skills and the knowledge from a lot of roles. And so there's a lot more opportunity for putting people on benches that come from other teams. There's a lot more of an opportunity to be flexible with where your individuals in your company are able to move over time. There are a lot of considerations. There's some unique challenges that smaller companies will face in succession planning. And again, even though the process stays the same, there's just some extra things we might want to think about. So I'll put in here just a little mention that we do have a guide on our website for succession planning in small to medium-sized businesses. So if you hop onto sigmasuccession.com, you can search up that guide, and that will give you some more in-depth information as well about succession planning with smaller companies. So I think we'll have time for one more question here. Leo, I know you talked earlier about buy-in in general. We have someone here who is commenting on, the owners are bought into succession planning, so there's that high-level support, but some of the managers or more department heads are not as bought into the process. So do you have any recommendations around how to maybe trickle down some of that buy-in to other stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of because management is involved with people every single day, and with performance management and whatnot. The amount of kind of perceived organizational support that employees receive as part of the succession planning process is quite integral to kind of effective management to begin with. And it can help bolster those, things like, again, organizational commitment, and various job attitudes, which, I mean, none of that makes a manager's job more difficult. If anything, it kind of really helps. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that point, Brittany, but there is in the kind of buy-in points that we discussed, most, if not all, are quite relevant to managers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll brag about the fact that we have another guide for this. So if you hop onto our website, again, we do have a guide around getting buy-in. And like Leo was saying, the concept of getting buy-in is similar no matter what level that you're at. The thing that's really important is if you know the specific challenge that somebody's having around getting buy-in, the reason why they're not bought into it, you can use that as an opportunity to speak to some of the things that maybe they're hesitant about or worried about. So just a little bit more exploration, conversation around what the hesitation is can help you to provide people with the right information or education that they need to get more on board with it. So maybe just having more conversations about it can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, as humans, we do tend to overvalue is the word, things that are closer to us in time. So it can be difficult to envision the benefit of something that's kind of somewhere in the future. But it might be helpful to picture a situation where something happens and X number of people depart the company, and picture that situation with and without a succession plan in place. And that might help make concrete the value of front loading that work, because understandably, looking at all this and being like, oh, this is a lot of work, keeping in mind kind of the future benefits of it, I think, can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with that, we will wrap up our Q&A period. Again, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the email training@sigmaassessmentsystems.com. We're happy to continue the conversation. I just have a couple of announcements to make. So for those of you that this is relevant for, you will know what I'm talking about. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you're probably fine. But we do provide professional development credits for some of our webinars. And so we have SHRM and ATD accreditation for this session. If you are somebody who would like SHRM accreditation, please select yes. We'll need to provide a certificate for you. So we just need to know who you are. If you missed this poll for some reason and you later want to let us know that you want a certificate, again, you can email us and that is fine. But for those of you that have responded yes to this poll, we will respond with a certificate for you in the next few days. So I'll just give it a minute for anyone else who wants to complete it. Okay, and if you don't need a certificate, again, it's not a problem at all. So just those of you who need one to select yes would be great. Okay, so the other final items that I just want to discuss are that we really appreciate that everybody took the time to join us here today. If you like what you saw in terms of webinars, we do have other webinars that we've been doing throughout the year. So we're in October now, we've given quite a few, but at least once a month we offer webinars to a general audience. If you're interested, please go on and check out our events page. We have some really good webinars coming up around, we have an interview with an expert on leader character. We also have a popular webinar coming up around communication. Communication is one of those skills that every organization can probably do a little bit better. So if you're looking for some more information on and tips and tricks on how to do so, you can join us for our November webinar. We'll also be rerunning this webinar a few more times this year. So if you'd like to recommend to anyone else who's struggling with succession planning, you can let them know that we'll be running this again in November and December as well. Finally, we have a feedback survey after this webinar. So when you close out, you'll get a little survey that pops up automatically. If you wouldn't mind taking just a minute to provide us with some feedback, we recommend. We are interested in metrics and in measuring how we're doing. And so we do read every single response and we use that to improve our webinars along the way. So it is an anonymous survey, so no worries about having to attach your name. But if you have any thoughts about how things went today, we would really love to hear them. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much to everyone for attending. Thank you so much to Leo for a great presentation. And I look forward to hearing from some of you afterwards for any follow-up questions. And keep an eye out, please, for the slides in the recording, because we'll be sharing that as well. So thank you, everyone.